Here.
Here.
Thank you, Ms. Milton. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, the first item on our agenda is discussion regarding school modernization project recommendations and process. As most of you know, we got started on the town council side a couple weeks ago with our first meeting. I'm hoping tonight will be kind of a quick meeting. I know a lot of people have family functions and things to attend with the long weekend, so my goal is not to have too long a meeting tonight. We do have a short executive session afterwards, which hopefully won't be too long as well. But I appreciate everybody being here tonight. I see members of our Board of Ed here, certainly Board of Ed staff and town staff. Thank you all for being here, and certainly our consultants from Colliers. I know it's a busy week for everybody, but rather than try to cancel and not do anything, I felt it was important to keep the ball rolling and at least get some of us together tonight. So thank you all for being here. And with that, I'll kind of kick it off. I'm sure we all have some questions again, but I don't think there were a lot of questions sent over to you guys this week. I know that we have some things to work on. As I said last meeting, from my perspective, I think the biggest issue that I'm going to be focusing on is the finance side of things, the impacts that school modernization has relative to this community. I think school modernization did a lot of work that we don't want to regurgitate. I want to respect the work that they've done and advance the proposal that they've suggested at this point, unless and until we get to a point where we feel like the option doesn't make sense and we need to move in another direction. And with that, obviously, the ed specs and making sure that whatever is done works for the school and the kids is really the Board of Ed's job. And I know they're working on that and focusing on it. And it's my understanding that the plan that was proposed, as well as the secondary plan, both work for the Board of Ed from a educational delivery perspective. And I don't think we've heard anything otherwise to that effect. So with that, I'm going to just kick it off and start with Chuck and John relative to one of the documents that I know we all received. I had it a number of days ago. My apologies. I did get it out to all of you today through Sean's office, which is 3 proposals to do a test fit. I think we were most concerned about doing a test fit based on the Norton property. It's a smaller site, something that if in fact we move forward with a elementary school option, that was the site initially. I think we were a little concerned about making sure something would work there. I think the other site on the north end, potentially, if we're doing something out on Jarvis, that site has already been test fit for a larger building. I think it'll work. So if you don't mind, Chuck and John, if you can just give us an overview on the test fit proposals that you have. We can't approve it tonight, and particularly since there's a number of council members not here, I'd rather just push it to our next meeting. But I think from a timing perspective, it's not an issue. I know that I spoke with Tony and Jeff. I think you guys are good with advancing that test fit. You're in support of that. I'm certainly going to be in support of it. I just want to make sure we've got the right company doing the right work and we can get that moving as quick as possible, hopefully, if the council is so inclined. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Chuck and John. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so in our last meeting, I think we did talk about performing some test fits for the Norton site, just to, from a planimetric 2D level, to confirm if the parcel can support a roughly 100,000 square foot elementary school on the site. Again, just from a planimetric view, looking at the property boundaries and setbacks, taken again more of like what we call a massing. And I did hand around to you all, and I think you might have seen these diagrams here. Kind of represents what we're talking about for the level of effort. It's using existing GIS information system that is on the town website, and information readily available. We're not doing A2 surveys. We're not confirming utilities on site at this point. It's really, can we fit this mass on the site and the associated supporting components for that school, such as playgrounds, parking lots, bus drop-off, parent drop-off, which nowadays is typically a separate function. They're usually separated in some way, shape, or form. And pretty much that's the effort. If there's wetlands that they can see in the GIS mapping available, they'll let us know and kind of highlight that, but also looking at the setbacks that are in the planning and zoning regulations for Cheshire to make sure everything kind of fits. The parcel is roughly, what, 18 acres, John?
Yes.
Yeah, 17. So the state of Connecticut had developed a set of design guidelines, and keyword is guidelines. They're not must-haves, but they're guidelines. For elementary schools, they recommend 10 acres plus one for every 100 students thereafter. So in this case, being roughly 669 students, I think, for the enrollment, between 16 and 17 acres is what would be recommended. We've built schools on smaller sites and certainly larger sites, and each site is unique to itself. Topography, wetlands, and other attributes, and you really have to look at them on a case-by-case basis. We built schools on smaller sites than the recommendations, just because that's what we had, and we had to make it work, and we've made it work. So the goal here is really at a very high level, without expending a lot of time and effort to see if it can fit. And then if it can fit, then we would take the next steps to potentially investigate it further. Because we didn't do that effort in our first couple phases with the SMC for it. We solicited in talking with, I'll say, the executive group a couple weeks ago. We solicited 3 proposals from 3 reputable architecture firms, and just for record, there's many of them out there. We work with all of them. The 3 we chose were not necessarily anything against any of the other ones. We've had good experience with all 3 of these. They're all have a lot of experience in the school as architects that design schools. One of them is the architect of the 2 schools that the SMC went to visit in South Windsor, actually the phase 2, Eli Terry and Philip R. Smith, and that is Moser Pylon that designed those. So, if for those who may have taken that visit, you've seen what they can do. And the other 2, JCJ, who's out of Hartford, Tecton's out of Hartford, Moser Pylon's out of Weathersfield. They're all highly qualified. And I could have grabbed 7 more, but for this level of effort, I don't think that's warranted at this point.
Okay, so the one on Jarvis, which we're not going to have to do, or right now we don't have to do any kind of test fit for that.
Yeah, based on what we see here, and this was, I believe, done by Taisu Kim Partners in coordination with Malone McBroom, which is now SLR2. Again, very good firms, very high qualified firms. Based upon what we're seeing on this, which I think was done at 17, at this point, I wouldn't see a need to do it right now as we talk. So,
And the acreage on that lot is?
That one's a very large one. That was.
But the property that is being taken up is not all 30. It's about maybe 3/4 or half that.
Yeah, probably, because down towards, as you're looking at that one towards the right side where you see the curved line, there's like a water course.
Yeah.
That the parcel goes through there, but that lower area appears, I believe it's a floodplain.
Yeah, I'm just
Up
trying to
in
get
that area.
an idea of, okay, so that's a lot that's something that would fit if over at Norton, if they have the right test fit over there. And the 3 proposals they're all doing the same thing that, I didn't have a chance to go through them all.
Yeah, no, what we did is we met with all 3 virtually. It was relatively informal. We didn't do a formal RFP. We met with all 3 of them, having worked with all 3. Again, they're already qualified in our opinion. Explain the level of effort. We gave them about a week to respond and submit qualifications. 2 of the firms, Tecton and JCJ, gave us proposals that we felt were really more than what we were asking for. They're really going to get in the weeds, traffic studies and so forth. We said, listen, we don't need to do that. We're really a very basic planimetric effort similar to this. So we went back to those 2 and said, and nobody knew the numbers. We said, considering what we just talked about, take a look at it and resubmit. So they came back with a second proposal, understanding the scope. a little bit better. So they came in, much lower.
And Moser Highland was still a lot lower than,
Well, so Moser Pylon came in at $4,500. Tecton came back in at $45 on their second round. And again, all three are great, but and basically need to have a tiebreaker, all things being equal, qualifications being equal. And our recommendation, since they came in first, Moser Pylon, we feel that being a tiebreaker, they understood the scope first. And I mean, it's a very simple process, nothing,
how long would it
magic about
normally take to do this and to have results by?
Oh, for the test fit, probably a couple of weeks.
All right, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mr. Walsh. And as we move down the tracks on evaluating the proposal from the SMC, which is the two elementary schools, I think it's important that we start to identify, we talked about this as a group, identifies the sites or potential sites and whether those sites might fit. I think we talked a little bit about the Chapman property being a tight site and that we would probably have to move potentially to the Marion Road site, which we know was test fitted for a middle school, which is much larger. So I don't think we need to do a test fit on that property unless I hear otherwise from anyone, but I don't think we need to do it at the moment. But Norton was a question, and so I think it's important we at least do Norton to get this initial test fit. So something glaring doesn't jump out at us and say, we need to eliminate it immediately. If we do, then we've got to start thinking about other options for a South End elementary school. So I think it's important we do it. I'm certainly going to recommend that we do it at our next meeting and hopefully get the votes to go forward. The one question I had, Chuck, on these proposals was it looked to me, while the initial reports were both $4,500 each, it looked like the Moser Pylon report included an initial proposal to the council. The Tecton Architects proposal didn't say anything about that and said it was $4,500 for the test fit diagrams and plan, and then preparation meetings and presentations was another $1,500. So the way I read it, I think the Moser one may be a bit cheaper anyway. And they also agreed to give us a cost of $4,000 for any secondary test fits that we need to do. So I thought that was reasonable as well. So from my perspective, based on reading through these, assuming everything else is equal, I think I would support going forward with Moser Pylon or Pelon Nelson. So we can talk a little bit more about that as a group, council, and but I'll have it on the agenda for our next meeting and we can take a vote on it. Any objections to that? Okay. Chuck and John, we spoke a little bit early today about the process. I think it's important that, we understand really what SMC, what drove their decision making. And when we spoke, and obviously as you read through the reporting, it was really driven most by a data-driven process, space projection process. Can you guys give us a little more background? I think it's important for us and particularly community to understand what drove the SMC to narrow their 13 or 11 options. I think they started with about 13 different options and then dwindled it down to the final two and then eventually made the final proposal, which was the two elementary schools. So can you just give us a little more information on, what that process was like and why it went the way it went and inevitably ended up with the proposal we got?
Sure. So many times just when we get involved with some districts, so many folks have probably lived here for quite a few years and has seen your towns change. Many times when we start this process initially, there's sometimes a preconceived notion of what a solution would be for a plan similar as this. Having inside experience and being into schools, whether you're a teacher, administrator, a governing body, like town council like yourself. And sometimes we find that although a lot of times that hunch is probably right or very close, if you're asked, well, where's the data supporting that is such an option, it may not fully be there. So understanding the state process and the fact that obviously finances are a strong driver here and reimbursement from the state is going to be a significant factor here. That taken in their process and their guidelines for submitting not just one grant application, but if you had multiple in a master plan like this, looking through their guidelines and understanding what it is they're going to be looking for. And that is looking at a plan like this in a holistic view, not just looking at one school, a one-off, but your district as a whole. And that's what we've done here. One of the major drivers with the state of Connecticut and drivers for the estimated size of your schools and how much they think you need is driven from those enrollment projections that we've discussed many times. I believe just recently, 3-4 years ago, the enrollment was declining or maybe even.
It was, bottoming out at least.
Yeah. And that was, I think, just maybe 3 years ago, whereas remaining level, and that was a lot of districts throughout Connecticut was doing the same thing. But having those numbers currently, you take those 8-year high enrollment projections, which is the statutory requirement that you can submit. And there's a space standard, we can show it later, but it's a spreadsheet and you fill in, square foot per pupil. And what it basically does, it tells us how large the building could be. And the state of Connecticut looks at that individually, but also they're looking at holistically. So in our case, we basically have, the 4 primary elementary schools and then Darcy. And if you take your total enrollment and you factor how much space you need in total versus what you have, those numbers, that data, is indicating us that we need, more square footage based upon that calculation. So understanding that data, the state's going to look at it. That's how they're going to review any grant applications that come through. That's how they're going to look at the plan in whole as well. So that's one data is enrollment, which equates to size of a building, but also the conditions of your buildings and the spaces. And I think if anybody's been in the buildings, they're little, they're ready for some upgrades, if you will.
Chuck, if I don't mind interrupting a little bit, just as we go along, and please, council, jump in if you have questions along the way. So one piece of the data that was done is obviously enrollment and space capacity, I guess, or space availability. So that drove you to a determination that we clearly don't have enough space, but then you determined where you don't have enough space at certain times over the next many years. So I assume that that's all in here. I understand that.
Mhm.
So it's that data that drove you towards where were the biggest issues in the coming years, where did we need to focus? And that led, I think, eventually to potentially a new middle school, which would pull the 6th grade, I guess, out of the elementary schools, put it into the middle school, open up some additional space in the elementary schools, which could solve some of the enrollment issues there, or potentially, which was the proposal that came forward, which was the 2 elementary schools, because that's really where the biggest enrollment issues are. Is that accurate?
That is accurate.
Okay.
Correct. Yep. Yeah. And the enrollments, just speaking to those, and we looked at conditions, and I think the schools in general, the high school, obviously the front portion is newer, but the original portion in the back, certainly, there's a lot of proponents, speaking, why isn't that going first? From a conditions assessment, you can argue them either way between elementary schools and the high school. However, when you have adequate space at the high school level, and currently at Dodd, the middle school, the urgency fell on this enrollment projection because in a couple of years, the schools are going to run out of space at the elementary school level. So, there's 13 different options, but a lot of them were similar options, but phasing was split where we put the high school first. Then maybe we start with the elementary schools, and those can still change versus doing the elementary schools first, or new middle school, like you said. That's going to provide a relief on that space by pulling 6th grade out and making those K5s.
So into the foreseeable future, capacity-wise, the elementary school and the high school, they have, from what I see, they have excess capacity. We're not going to reach capacity as they sit today, square footage-wise. We're not going to reach capacity in either the middle school or the high school. Is that accurate?
That is correct based upon the enrollments we have.
So the issue is really in the elementary schools. And I understand you can solve that issue through a couple of different plans, whether it be the new middle school or the new elementary schools. I understand that. But the problem is driven by the elementary school enrollment projections. And therefore, the state drives or mandates where we need to focus. Because as I read through the report, that whether some people want to do a new high school, and I think a lot of us would like to start with that, potentially, the state would never support that. And it's in this report that says the state would never support that because our issues more recently are going to be in the elementary schools.
Yeah, correct.
Correct?
We did meet with the state, and we were, we try to be very cautious of what, opine on what the state's opinion would be. We have a lot of experience with them. But that's why we did meet with, OSCGR, Office of School Construction Grants and Review, to confirm that. And the indication was, yeah, we understand that your high school needs attention. However, focusing on the high school before that, it would be hard for them to support that.
And the reason, folks, why I'm going down these paths, I know it's probably second nature to some of us and all of you, but I think the public deserves to understand and hear again what's driving us to where the proposals are, or the proposal is, and really why the council is going to be moving this thing forward in one way, shape, or another. So this is information really more for just those of us that are sitting in this room. It's really for the entire public to understand the process. So thank you for kind of walking down this path, because I think it's important
Certainly.
to understand that the data really drove where the school modernization committee went. And I'm sure all of those members of SMC, a lot of them had differences of opinion of what they'd like to see happen. But inevitably, they followed the data, they followed the process that was really driven mostly by the state of Connecticut and others, and obviously the data that we have. And that inevitably got us to where we are today. So, again, any more information you can share on what drove us to this final point, I'd appreciate it.
And I think one of the other ones was, impact to the school, school modernization, 21st century learning. There was also discussions on, which plans would affect the most students as well, versus maybe just a one-off school here or there. I know, and one of the options with the middle school option, obviously, all the students going through Cheshire would go through that school and have a benefit there. Obviously, the high school, same situation. Where in elementary schools, if you build two new in the preferred plan, assumedly at the same time, those districts are receiving that benefit right away. But it's a fiscal responsibility issue and how much you can borrow at one time. It's kind of like when you remodel your house, unless you're in a good position to remodel it, you usually do it in pieces. And similar for a school district, we never see a school district redo all their schools at the same time. It's just cost prohibitive, most of the time. But looking at that was another one, and looking at parity, and it was a lot of debate between the two options that were put forth.
Questions? Yes, Mr. Tubman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chuck, thank you. With regard to the meeting that you had with the state school construction group that talked about the reimbursement funding, is it safe to say that basically when it came to high school, they gave us a flat no?
I don't know if I'd say a flat no. I think the data on the elementary schools was a stronger driver. The fact that if you only went with an assumption is you would do the high school and not the elementary schools at the same time. If you voted, say, we're going to do 2 elementary schools and do the high school, that's certainly a possibility. But if it was the high school first, I think I would word is they would have a hard time supporting it, because in a couple of years, you're either going to have to put in portables or do additions at your elementary schools. You're still going to have that problem. The high school's not going to solve that problem, and there's enough room. And frankly, the high school is oversized right now too. So coming up with that solution that would be that they would participate with would take some work. But it's close. I don't want to say it was a flat no, but I don't think they would support that as strongly as the preferred plan.
And how would you characterize the way the state talked about reimbursement for the other 2 proposals that SMC brought forward?
For the preferred plan with the 2 new elementary schools, my perceptions they were, based upon the information they had, in favor of that. They like the idea of elementary school size between 400 and 700 students. These are in the 650 range. And that's a good size for an elementary school. In Connecticut, we see that quite often, if not smaller. So it was more favorable on that one. The middle school, they were concerned about a middle school being 900 students. And I believe is more from just the logistics and the operating, how that would operate in the district. But it wasn't a flat no there. It was just, they don't typically seem as that large, but there are middle schools, grades 6 to 8. Hamden Middle School right down the street is like 1,300 students, I believe. They're moving 6th grade there, I think next year. But they kind of leaned more towards the preferred option.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr.
Chair.
Talbot. Yes, Ms. Pavano.
Thank you. Just for clarification, the projection on the enrollment was over an 8 to 10 year period. Is that correct? And
Yep.
if we went out and adopted this plan of going to 2 elementary schools, each of those would be bonded separately, correct? One school would be started and bonded, and then you would have to have a second referendum in order to start the second school? How does that work?
No, you can put a referendum for multiple projects at once. We've had actually 3 in one and 2 in another, South Windsor, but they did 2 at the same time. But they are separate grant applications and separate grant commitments. So when you bill for them, you have to keep the funding and the finances separate between the 2. But you can put a referendum together for both of them.
So Sandy, we could do them both together. We can split them if we choose. And I assume we can have a referendum for both. And figure out how you want to manage the construction of each one and how we'll end up bonding them. But I think that's very flexible for us. I think that's on our side to decide.
Correct. Yeah, the
Thank
state
you.
doesn't dictate that.
Yes, Mr. Walsh.
For the 2 elementary schools, did you say, I think the last meeting, that it would almost be cheaper to do the 2 middle schools at the same time versus doing one at once and one at the other? Or is it, because, I mean, right now, I mean, we're not ready to put out the bid, but I mean, if we did now, I'm sure the cost would be astronomical due to the high cost of lumber and stuff. But I thought you said at the last meeting, it would be more feasible to do 2 at once versus doing one now or one later. Did I understand that right?
Close. There's some synergies if you go out with 2 at the same time, and you hire one architect for both. You're going to get common specifications. You're going to get consistency with materials between those 2 schools, so that from a maintenance standpoint, the facilities director, it's nice when you have the same mechanical systems specified. Hopefully you get bought that way. We can't sole source those in a project. But certainly if going out to construction, depending on the delivery system, we've been using what they call construction manager at risk for many. State of Connecticut is kind of, I believe they're leaning more towards general contractor for some projects of the magnitude that these are. But what we've seen in a couple instances, doesn't happen all the time with 2 at the same time, you get competitive bidding, especially 2 new schools. They're very, very attractive to bidders. We've seen very good bid results with new schools, but at the same time, what they'll do is a combined bid where the mechanical contractor bids on one and they bid separately on the other one, but they offer a cost savings if they're awarded both. So you might be able to gain some savings there, but it's very attractive is probably the best way to describe it. But we've had good results so far. We've had our projects come in under bid on those or under budget. But as you said, right now the materials market is very volatile. We've had projects come under, but we think it's a good thing going out with 2 at the same time. We think there is some savings. It's kind of hard to estimate them because there's not a lot of cases that do that.
And one other question, going along the lines of what Mr. Talbot was asking about the state. When you say they're not that thrilled with it, what does it take, to, like, I mean, is it when you say the state isn't that enthralled with one project over another, what does it take to change the state to convince them? I mean, because are you saying when they're not thrilled with it, that there's a chance that they may not bond it if we passed it through? Or are you saying we might have to make a lot of changes in order to do that?
If we're referring to the middle school option, that would be certainly in the Board of Ed and how they'd operate. My understanding of the conversation is, there'd have to be more conversation of how Cheshire Public Schools would be operating that from a long-term basis. We didn't get into a whole lot of specifics with it. It was a very high-level conversation, so there wasn't, I didn't have exacts. I don't know, maybe if Dr. Solon has specifics, he might. But in the conversation, it was, I think they're concerned with that size of a school and maybe down the road, okay, hey, if there was a decline, it's a pretty big school. I think we're 211,000 square feet?
Yeah.
Roughly 200,000 square feet. That's a pretty large middle school. So I think that's kind of their concern in maintaining those. It's a lot of building to take care of. But I'm speculating on that, to be honest. He wasn't very specific, the director.
What about the numbers? The school of that many kids in it.
Just a lot of
That's really what it
students.
was.
And that's 900 you said it would have? Or
1,100.
1,100.
We 1,100 on that one?
1,100.
11? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Sorry about that.
All right. thanks.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Jenks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I just wanted to go over what I recall in the conversation that we had when you came back from that meeting. I remember distinctly the conversation having to do with, if the community supports it, then the state would, if we showed them why we want to do that and what the programming is, and if the community supports it, then they probably would support it. It wasn't at all that they were saying that they wouldn't support it. That's what I recall our conversation being.
Yeah, it definitely was. It wasn't an absolute no. Let's make it clear. They didn't say an absolute no. They just, as Dr. Solon just mentioned, it's a large school that they don't typically see, but it wasn't an absolute no.
Thank you, Mr. Jenks. Mr. Veliver.
Thank you. Just a quick question. If we were to build the 6 to 8 middle school, that would, I guess my question is, what does that do for capacity in the elementary schools? How many, if we're pulling the 6th graders out, how many students does that pull out? And does that actually buy us any real time? Or are we looking at potentially another needing to still have a capacity issue at the elementary school level?
Yeah, so by pulling the 6th grade out and getting that done, it does provide relief on a long-term basis. There would be some redistricting still required to kind of, move some of the students around in that. And certainly in that scenario, there's a couple, if you look at the maps, we provided them. John's going to, pull out the specific number of grade 6 students. We have that specific number. But the result was it would provide relief on a longer term basis. It wouldn't be just like 3 or 4 years and then we're, exceeding capacity again. There's enough room in what we propose for the remaining schools to. Is that be reduced numbers? But how many grade 6? I want to see how many grade 6 there was. Yeah.
And if you want that you can get, if that's easier to just send us something at some point in time, that's fine as well.
Yeah, but I'm just trying to think, what is the 6th grade enrollment? I just want to see what yeah, I'll bring that up. I just got it right here in front of me, just about. So the projections, so for the 6th graders in the projections, there's roughly showing 300 in the highest year, about 388 grade 6 students that would get pushed up to the middle school. But in essence, again, the remaining schools, there'd have to be, we're talking about renovations into those. Felt that we could fit into the existing. And I think we had a smaller Chapman in that scenario as well. In that one, so.
I mean, as an extra school?
No, it was a revision to the scenario. So in that option, 1172 8-year enrollment high for the 6 to 8. We said a new Chapman in that scenario was 547 student enrollment, roughly 75,000 square feet in that option. And we had another option for renovating, but the new would be about 75,000 square feet. And if we did, that would have to be a test fit if it was on that site, because it is a very, very tight site for that. And then we talked about renovating Doolittle, Highland, and Norton in that scenario.
Thank you.
All set, Mr. Muller?
Yep.
Mr. Talbot?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With regard, Chuck, with regard to the Norton site, what's the square footage currently? And then what percentage or what number is occupied by that front half? Basically, you've got the front half that's being utilized and the back half that isn't. So what, do you know what the square footage is in that back half as opposed to the front?
On an acreage, I haven't. On an acreage, we haven't measured that back half. Just looking at by observation, because it's kind of like a flag shape where that back half kind of goes off to the right. I'd estimate that front flag where it currently exists, probably 30% of the total site, and that's on a rough scale. I could actually probably do it quickly if you wanted that.
It's not that critical, and maybe I can get to what I'm looking for in a different way.
Sure.
I know there's quite a bit of woods surrounding that back area where there were 2 fields at one point.
Yep.
Would any of that space or that woods have to be utilized then for the new Norton footprint?
Absolutely. Yes. Where it goes off to the right and it's more wooded.
Along the right-hand side.
Yeah.
And behind the curve of Dryden Drive, if you will.
Yes, that where you go up through the site and you kind of go off to the right.
Yeah.
I'm pretty confident that, and that's kind of the reason for the test fit, that we would have to clear some of that area to make room, because a building of this size, 100,000 square feet in the preferred option, you're talking 17, 18 acres. You're basically using that entire site. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And I know that you're probably familiar with the site and have been on the property. So the site, the area of the woods that you're talking about.
Mhm.
So if we call that the right side in the other portion of the woods, the top portion, in the top left portion of the woods, at least 100 years ago when I was there were wetlands back there. Is that still the case?
I'm gonna look at the topo.
And I mean, for the purpose of this, I may be getting, too far into the weeds,
Yes,
and if
you
so,
are.
I apologize.
No, looking, and I'm just bringing up a PDF off the GIS. It's not indicating, but that could be a layer that wasn't turned on there. It looks like there is, just again, looking at the topography here quickly, looks like there could be a low-lying area there. Whether that's still wetlands, it depends on what type of wetlands, because sometimes there are, I think they call them low-quality wetlands, where they're kind of isolated to themselves. They don't necessarily feed out. That would have to be certainly field investigated, by a soil scientist to confirm that.
Yeah, because there's drainage that comes off of Dryden that goes down along the back in between the Norton property and Ott Drive, and then basically turns the corner as Sharon Drive turns the corner, and then comes back around onto Farmington, and that was kind of a collection area. But I assume that's something that the site people will take a look at and find out
Yes.
if it's usable or not usable.
Yeah, certainly in these efforts, and the proposal would be taking a preliminary look at that, looking at, turn all, because your GIS system has multiple different levels in it. In the printout I had, it might not have, had that turned on. Usually we do, but they would certainly look at that.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely,
Thank you,
yeah.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Tevlin. Just to follow up on that, clearly, we're not getting a current wetlands delineation in the test fit. We're not getting a current A2 survey. We're not getting a current topo, but we're getting everything that's on the GIS map whenever that stuff was put on there. So I think there is generally wetlands from what I know of the GIS mapping on there. So again, just to confirm, the test fit will take whatever's on that GIS mapping and play it into this design to make sure it fits. Obviously, before we build, we're gonna have to do a current A2 survey and a wetlands delineation and all that, but I think it's probably a good start. You agree?
Yes, yeah, for the initial level, just from, again, that planimetric view, because we can spend a lot of money on doing surveys and wetland delineation, and maybe take it one step at a time in doing that.
Right. I'm just going to go back to a couple of things. I'm just reading it in the report, in the school modernization report and the presentation that was provided to us in the Board of Ed. And it does talk about some of the things that we're discussing here now, which says that starting with the high school project would essentially be a hard no. I know nothing's a hard no, but it'd be a tough one given the enrollment projections. The 6 through 8 middle school with a projected enrollment of about 1,200 students is very large and not preferred. 900 would be a recommended max. Not ruled out by the state, but would require a further study to validate as an option. So we certainly understand that. It's not something the state had said no to. It also says that 400 to 700 student enrollment for elementary schools is preferred. 850 plus or so is too large. So that kind of lends me back to kind of my overall thoughts on this is that, the state does play a big role in this. They're going to be funding a big portion of it. They've been through this process a lot. They clearly have a lot of experience, and we need to work with them along with our experts on the Board of Ed side who are going to determine how we best deliver schooling to our children. But nonetheless, it looks to me, based on the proposal that SMC brought forward, it kind of caught more of the issues that the state was focused on. And one of the things, and we've talked about a number of them already, but one of them that I want to just ask a question on is Highland School. It's a large school. It's over 800 students currently. Is that correct? And is it also correct if we supported a 2-school elementary option, that the redistricting, let's assume we did a school out on Marion Road. I think the current Chapman site, in my opinion, is just too tight. I think there are some benefits by doing a new Chapman out on Marion Road potentially, because it's a bigger site. And I think from what I'm reading, it helps with redistricting. And that's another area that I think is a benefit in terms of enrollment in each of the schools and just general redistricting, because as you look at it, you've got, Chapman and Highland are very close where they currently are. Is that correct? Can you expound on that a little bit about if in fact we did do a new Chapman school out on Marion Road location, we would obviously be redistricting, and what that would do to the enrollment of all the schools? It looks to me like it gets them all very much in line with what the state would be looking for in terms of kind of ideal sizes for these elementary schools. Is that a reasonable kind of resolution that I've come to based on reading through this?
Thanks. It levels them out and right sizes them a little closer than having that disparity between, like, say, Chapman and Highland, which is, the enrollments are much, there's a bigger delta there. So Highland would still be the largest one, though. Yeah.
But it solves I guess what I'm trying to get at, I'm trying to make sure that whatever plan we advance solves the Highland School issue in terms of sizing. Because when you look, if you go back and you look at capacity, it looks like Highland is going to be past capacity in 23, 24,
Mhm.
which is right around the corner, obviously. So, I guess the plan that's proposed will solve that issue and through the redistricting or however we're going to do it in building the new school that would solve that Highland School size problem is really what I'm trying to get at. That's correct?
Yeah, so in the preferred scenario, the projected 8-year high is 780 students for that, and we're projecting the size of the building might have to tweak up a little bit. It's 106,000 square feet right now. We're estimating about 111 GSF. So it depending on how it's programmed, it's so tight, it may or may not need an addition. All depends on the ed spec, where those lines are drawn for redistricting. And this was a high level redistricting. We'd probably try and make it a goal to say, okay, what do we have to do to get that so we don't have to do an addition? And maybe do we push a few more students into that newer school from there? That's just a strategy. But right now it's very close to being the size it needs to be for the projected enrollment.
Well, again, that's what I'm getting at. I want to make sure as we go further down the path here that as we're evaluating, if we are evaluating these two elementary schools as the option we want to get behind, that we can address the issue at Highland, because the last thing we want to do is have to face another addition onto that building immediately because they're beyond capacity.
Yeah,
So
these two
that's
new
something
ones
I'm going to want
provide
some information on.
Yeah, these two new schools provide that relief by making, okay, if you replace Chapman, if we will, that makes that one larger and it's making Norton larger. So it's providing that relief.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any other questions from members of the council at this point? No? Okay. One of the things that I've been thinking about, and I mentioned at the last meeting, I really want to focus on ADA issues as much as we can. I'd like to see us accomplish as many ADA issues as we can in the first phase of this plan. Obviously, it needs to be affordable, but we want it to accomplish as much as we possibly can because you never know how far you're going to go down the path and when you're going to do the next phase. So for me, it's checking off as many ADA issues as we can. And for me, it brings into the mix Humiston. And I really would like to talk about the potential, if this council is so willing, and certainly along with the Board of Ed and staff and everyone else, to consider rolling in to the options that we're looking to advance, dealing with Humiston. And potentially, one of the thoughts I had is if we did get behind the elementary school option and we did look at the Marion Road piece because it was sized for a middle school, that potentially we could size it up a bit to accommodate the Humiston students, which I think are 30 plus from what I understand. Dr. Solon, is that accurate? About 30 students? Okay, thank you. So if we can try to accommodate, assuming it works from an educational delivery standpoint, which I have no knowledge in, but assuming it did, could we look at potentially doing something into that new elementary school that would accommodate not only the Humiston students, but also central office? And if in fact we can do that, obviously we've got budgeting issues to talk about, but is there any reimbursement for those additions at all? We talked a little bit about it last week or 2 weeks ago, but I would like to explore that a little bit further and kind of add that into the mix because I think it is another ADA issue that we certainly need to address. We clearly understand Humiston is not ADA compliant to the extent we want it to be. So for me, that's another issue.
With respect to central offices, the state does, and it's a conversation on a case-by-case basis when they do participate in board central offices, but it's at 50% of your reimbursement rate. As far as the alternative high school, that's a unique program. We'd have to talk to them of what that percentage rate would be if incorporated somewhere else.
But it sounds like there is some reimbursement, which in my opinion is a good thing. I mean,
Yes,
something's better than
typically
nothing.
there is, and from what we've seen, we've done many districts where central office has gone into a newer renovated school.
So, that's something that I would suggest that we all kind of throw into the mix. Again, if this council is so inclined to keep going down these tracks, that's something I'd like to see some information on and potentially some budgeting on as well that we can add to the mix. Any questions at this point? Mr. Walsh?
Yeah, I want to agree with you on, I think the ADA compliancy is very important. And it's not just for the students, and we should remember that it's for the faculty, it's for the parents, it's for the administration, it's for guests who come in to the school. We need to make sure that these schools are all ADA compliant. Chapman is far from that. I know from a personal standpoint that, it's difficult to get around, and that's part of the problem. If we did go with the new middle school, we're going to leave Chapman still not non-ADA compliant, and that's an issue for many people. And I think, our four oldest school buildings in this town are Humiston, Chapman, Darcy, and Norton. And I think the two elementary schools will fit right into, moving out a lot of our older buildings and bringing in newer ones so we can move forward. And going forward after phase one, there are phase two and phase three on these that we will be bringing up in years to come. It's not just going to stop at phase one, as far as I know. And I think, we have to address, like you said, the enrollment issue right now. And I think ADA compliancy is another very important issue that we need to address.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Mr. Veliver.
Thank you. And hopefully you can answer this question. If not, we can the information. But my question is, and this follows up on something I asked at the last meeting, and I was thinking about this, is that if we build the two new schools, they'll be air conditioned, as was Highland is already air conditioned. And my question is, how much, if we're talking about bringing all these schools up to at least some level of parity, one thing is, I think it'd be odd to leave one elementary school unair conditioned while having three air conditioned schools. And at the elementary level, I guess my question is, what would the cost be? Has that been calculated as far as the cost of air condition, like Doolittle? If that was the only thing we did to Doolittle, what would that cost add to that project?
Yeah, we haven't estimated that cost. We can certainly look at that on a cost per square foot basis with those type of projects. And it's an interesting question, because a lot of districts are looking at doing that with this new stimulus money from the federal government of purely just doing air conditioning. And what needs to be considered is not just the air conditioning system, but can the electrical power, systems provide the power necessary? Does it have the equipment to support the HVAC? Because that feeds that system, obviously. And then if you're putting in new ductwork in the ceilings, you're taking out in ceilings, replacing lights. So it kind of grows beyond it. There's other consequential impacts to putting, new HVAC systems in, for that. But we can certainly, give a budgetary range for Doolittle, if that's what we'd like to say.
Yeah, just see what that adds
Sure,
to the cost.
we can do that.
Thank you.
But there would be no reimbursement for that, correct?
That is correct. They do not reimburse for purely upgrading mechanical systems. It's only reimbursable when it's in a renovation or new project.
Great. And again, I'm not for or against. I just want to make sure
No,
everyone
thank you.
understands there's no reimbursement for that.
Right.
Would there be any energy efficiency opportunities for that school that we would be able to pursue that could include that kind of an upfit, or no?
Answer is yes. I think it depends on the combination. With these new systems, are so complex, and what also comes into play is your building envelope system. Not just looking at the mechanicals, but what are the conditions of the windows in the roof? And because we're putting in all that energy, you obviously want to keep it in that envelope. So a lot of parts and pieces that touch that. So there's a lot of nuance to that answer.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Veliver. You all set?
Yep.
Other questions, comments? So for me, I've kind of addressed the general questions I have regarding the plans. We're going to get into more of that, I'm sure, as we go further down the road. But again, as I've said, from my perspective as a member of the fiscal authority of the town of Cheshire, I believe both of these plans. There's really one plan that was proposed, but there's a backup plan that's proposed. It sounds to me like either of these plans are good plans that could work for the educational side of our community. I haven't heard anything from the school system that they're deadly opposed to one plan over the other. So for me, it's how we roll one of these plans out in a fiscally responsible manner that we can afford. And so for me, that's really where I'm going to be focused. as to how much can we get the biggest bang for the buck relative to our first phase, because you never know when phase two starts. We don't know what the temperature of the taxpayers are going to be relative to these improvements. So we have phase one. We need to make sure phase one works for some period of time. We hope phase two and phase three, or however many phases there are, that we eventually get to all of them. But at the end of the day, it's the taxpayers' decision where and when they get done. And we want to make sure that each phase works on a standalone basis. So for me, I'm trying to check off as many boxes as we can with the first phase. However, I'm really concerned about the fiscal impacts to the community, and not only our residents, but certainly our business people. We talk a lot on the council about impacts of our average taxpayer, which is a good benchmark. But there are a lot of other benchmarks. Not everybody's an average taxpayer. We have some very large businesses. When our mill rate, runs up a certain percentage, it impacts very, very much. And the last thing we can afford to do in this economy is to lose a large taxpayer, because then that burden then falls back on the residents. So it's kind of a snowballing effect. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm going to be looking at all of the facets of impacts here relative to not just the average taxpayer, but every taxpayer, and try to develop a plan that I think works for everybody. And to that end, for me, as we talked, I see Jim Jaskat here in the audience. I think I would like to spend some time with you and Sean and any other council member and any Board of Ed member that wants to attend the meeting, or certainly staff, to start working on some detailed projections, some forecasting. As I've said, we need to focus on not just what the impacts are of SMC, but what are the total impacts that we foresee coming down the pike in our community. Maybe there's some fiscal benefits that we're going to be getting, whether it be we have some bonding that's coming off the table, or we have some windfall that we haven't thought about. So we have some revenue benefits that we can look at. Maybe there's some savings. I know Mr. Massian has put together some information relative to projected operating savings and capital savings that would be seen if we implement a new modernization plan. All of that stuff, in my opinion, needs to be thrown into this forecasting so that we can really see what this looks like. And again, we're not going to have everything dotted to the nth degree. They're going to be projections. They're going to be somewhat speculative. But I think we owe it to the taxpayers to spend enough time to do this forecasting out at least a 10-year time frame and speculate as to what we think the impacts will be. And so, what we've got is a great report. It's a great jumping off point, but I believe we've got a lot of fiscal work to do, and I'm interested in doing it. And I'd like to spend some time with whoever is going to be part of that to begin forecasting these things, because there's a lot here. We've got the Bartlam Park project, which we've been talking about as a council. I'm personally very much in favor of advancing that to some degree. I think it's a great project for the community. And I think we need to be looking at a number of things. So, we need to look at this in a big picture perspective and not just from an SMC perspective. So, Jim, I don't know, we can talk about how we want to maybe have some work sessions. And again, anybody's, I'm not looking to be the one to lead that at all, but I certainly have some thoughts as to what I'd like to see in this report. So I'd like to set up some kind of a workshop sooner than later, Jim, to kind of talk about this and start developing at least a 10-year projection from my perspective. Anybody see any issue with that? No? And for me, that's really where I'm going to focus because, to me, it's all about the fiscal impact at this point. I think the plan proposed is a good plan. I think the elementary school is a good plan. I have no issues with either one of them. And I personally, I'm not picking a favorite. It's really about fiscal prudence for me. And if one plan is a little bit cheaper, and at the end of the day, it meets more of the boxes that I think the state's looking for, and it solves our issues, I'll probably support that one. However, I won't be penny wise, pound foolish. If we can spend a little more money and get a better project for this community in phase one, then I'm willing to look at that with my one vote as a council member. So I just want to let you all know how I'm going to be looking at it, and I'm really going to be focused on the numbers. I'm one of 9, and I'm looking forward to collaborating with the rest of the council. The Board of Ed is going to have a lot to say in this as well. And, Tony and I have talked a fair amount about, their perspective on this. And I see a number of Board of Ed members here tonight. I thank you all for being here, including staff. We want to collaborate with you all on this process. This is a community effort, and we all need to get behind this. I truly believe that if we're not all behind a plan, it won't pass. So we need to figure out what works. And at the end of the day, it may not work best for everybody, but if we can get behind a plan and stand shoulder to shoulder together, I think we got a shot at getting this thing done. If we can't do that, I don't think we do have a shot. And that's really my thoughts on this. I think it's as simple as that. So, I would hope that we would all be open-minded to, trying to advance something that checks off as many boxes as we can. So I don't have a lot more for tonight. I was hoping that we could kind of make a shorter meeting, and we have one other item on the agenda. Any other council members have anything? Mr. Jinks?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I didn't realize we were kind of wrapping up already. I would have made my comments a little earlier, but
I'm sorry, Mr. I'm only wrapping up for myself.
Okay.
I'm not looking to cut this short for you guys at all, so I don't
Okay.
mean any disrespect.
no, that's fine. That's fine. I mean, I continue to be concerned with the middle school as the proposal that we're kind of going down the road on, but I think everyone is kind of aware of that at this point. One thing I agree, Mr. Chairman, that we obviously need to be very concerned with the fiscal impacts, and we do have two proposals that are similar in their fiscal impacts. Although obviously the middle school proposal is a little bit more, especially over the long term. I've always been concerned about the value that we're presenting as well. I have continued to get comments from the public, and we got, the only comment we got between our last meeting and this one was in favor of the middle school project again. So I just want to kind of make sure we're kind of still weighing the two proposals. As I said before, I have an alternative proposal I'd like to present at some point as well too. And I also would like to ask, since the Board of Ed is here and Dr. Solon is here, is kind of, when are we going to hear more about what the Board of Ed thinks of these proposals and what your feedback has been from the public? I think we need to kind of get some of that feedback before we continue to move forward. So I don't know if anybody can speak to that at this point, but it'd be nice to sort of begin to understand kind of what the Board of Ed is thinking of as far as these two proposals go.
I are in the process of scheduling something for that, dedicated to that. We're looking at even Saturday mornings to be able to pull that off, so should be soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jinks. Again, I was just kind of closing my remarks, but I'm not looking to close the meeting for anyone else. We have plenty of time, and if you all have more to talk about, let's do it. All set, Mr. Talbot? Ms. Pavano? Mr. Walsh? Mr. Oliver? Okay. Mr. Jinks, you're all set?
Yeah, I'm good for now. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So I think with that, I see we have some Board of Ed members here. I want to make sure there's an opportunity for any public comment. If anyone would like to, make a statement or have anything to say or something to add, I certainly give you that opportunity at the moment. Seeing none there. And we did get a letter. Make sure I have it here, from Mr. Brian Lopez, who did send a letter to us relative to, public communications on SMC, again, supporting the middle school. And I'll read it very quickly because I think it is important that we understand what the community feels, and I hope we get more input from the community. But again, from my perspective, we have a report. We had SMC go through the process, and they provided us a recommendation. I believe as a council, we need to focus on their primary recommendation unless and until we hit a stumbling block that pushes us in another direction. That's what I feel. I'm one of 9. Mr. Jinks, I will ask you this, though. If you have a third plan that you'd like to propose, I think you should propose it sooner than later. I'm not aware of a third plan. I'm not sure where the third plan would come from, but if you have an option, I think we should talk about it because I'm all ears, as I'm sure the rest of the council is. So, I wasn't aware of another plan, but I'd love to hear about it. So at some point, if you'd like to present it to us, that'd be great. But I will read the letter from Mr. Lopez. Good afternoon. I've been following the process for the possibility and necessity of building new schools in Cheshire closely for quite some time. I'm a science teacher at Dodd, coach and parent of 3 Cheshire students. I've made my opinions clear throughout the emails to the town council and the SMC that Cheshire needs to start this process with the construction of a new 6 through 8 middle school. I was highly disappointed when the SMC chose the other option. It would, hold on here. Just bear with me. My eyes aren't what they used to be, and I can't read this small language. I was highly disappointed when the SMC chose the other option. It would like to again request and urge the town council to advocate for the new 6 through 8 middle school option that would be more beneficial to our community and more importantly to our students. Moving the 6th grade to the middle school will alleviate the crowded elementary schools, provide another year of growth at the middle school level where the age group belongs, and provide a campus that would have new theater space as well as new fields for all of our students to eventually use as well as the residents. The 6 through 8 design would also ensure the 6th graders would have certified SS and science teachers. I'm not sure what SS is, with 5 hours of class a week in each of those classes, which currently does not happen. I believe that there is a silent majority of voters and potential new Cheshire residents that would surely agree with the plans for an exciting and modern new middle school. I heard the major concern with this project was the size of the school, but I do not see the issues as we would have the correct staff-student ratios and size of building necessary to serve the students. The key would be to present to the state that the 6 through 8 design is a wish of the community and educational experts, which I believe to be significant, to influence the decision and get approval. I will spread the word to family and friends to stay involved and email you with the same request. Thank you for your service to the town and to the schools, and have a great weekend. Thank you, Mr. Lopez, for your information and input. And I hope we get many more of these. So with that, unless there's anything more to talk about, Mr. Jenks?
I was just going to say I'd be happy to present the next meeting.
Look forward to it. Thank you. Anything else from Sean or Arnett or John and Chuck or any other? Dr. Solon, Vin? No? Jim? Board of Ed members, you're all set? Thank you again for being here. We appreciate you sitting in, and we look forward to working on this with you all. And with that, I'm going to move on to the next item on our agenda, which is executive session. Let's see here. Find my sheets, folks. We're going to go into executive session to discuss labor negotiations, to include our personnel director, our town manager, our assistant town manager, and the 6 council members that are here. Motion.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Talbot. Second, Mr. Veliver. All in favor? Aye. Thank you.